Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Mr. Kovacic, hi. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for coming to Georgia to attend this summit and to talking to BMG.
It's absolutely wonderful to be back in Tbilisi, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Mr. Kovacic, let's begin our interview with a bit of a general question. How does the existence of the legal competition framework affect a country in general, any given country, and what is needed for right policies to be implemented at right time in any given country?
One of the most important factors is to begin with a good competition authority. That's a function of selecting good personnel, giving them suitable powers to enforce the law, to gather information, to do studies that identify areas of appropriate attention. And it's also a requirement that there be good courts to oversee the operation of the authority, that you have good civic associations and groups to provide commentary on what the authority does. Another vital element is to have a good university system, to have an intellectual infrastructure that supports the development of research, but also provides the talent that will go into the system. And you need an attentive parliament to provide oversight of policy choices and guidance made by the authority, to make them accountable for the choices they've made. These are many of the ingredients that go into building a good system.
Basically, division of power and democratic principles all around the board, right?
Yes, to have autonomy in the decision to use the agency's authority. That is, you don't want political leaders telling the authority that you have to prosecute this person or you have to leave this person alone. That is, when we talk about independence and autonomy, that's the autonomy that I think is crucial. But isolation from oversight would be a mistake. That's why the courts are important. That's why the oversight of elected officials is important. The agency should be accountable for its broad policy choices, but it should be able to use its prosecutorial powers and its investigative powers without intervention by political officials.
Mr. Kovacic, according to right-wing economic theory, markets need no intervention from the government because they can regulate themselves. We know that this, to the extreme, is not present in any country. Then there are different regulatory authorities, especially in competition as well. What is the general idea of having a competition authority within a country? And why is it considered that a competition authority, in especially emerging countries, is a very important political body that helps small countries to grow economically as well?
There are two respects in which the competition authority can ensure that markets work well for consumers and work well for the interests of the nation. One has to do with the activity of other government bodies. In emerging markets that have a long history of intrusive government participation in the market, there tend to be a number of forms of government intervention that unnecessarily restrict entry into the market and limit the capacity of new entrepreneurs or smaller firms to grow and develop. It's very important to have a voice in the country that tells the government in those instances to back away from those kinds of policies. So serving as an advocate for competition to create conditions that enable good rivalry by eliminating unnecessary government intervention is one crucial function. But the second is that private actors will, from time to time, choose strategies that are very good for the private actors, but not good for the larger society. Sometimes this takes the form of cartel arrangements by which firms decide who will bid on government tenders. Sometimes it takes the form of mergers that combine otherwise competitive enterprises into a single dominant firm. So there are what specialists call market failures that arise from private conduct that are suitable targets for intervention as well. So dealing with both public restraints on competition and private restraints on competition are well regarded as being suitable measures for intervention.
Let me go deeper about the society part of it. What are the social effects that competition policy have on a given society?
One of the most important is to promote growth. Competition law by itself cannot increase GDP in a dramatic way. It cannot transform the economy by itself. But it helps enable the establishment of conditions in which growth takes place. So one valuable contribution for the larger society is to make society wealthier. Another contribution is to ensure that the less well-advantaged in society have the benefits of economic growth. That means ensuring that competition thrives for things such as public services that are purchased through government procurement, that otherwise might be the subject of bid rigging schemes, to make sure that those services, education, transportation, healthcare, to take examples, are provided in a competitive way. Those services tend to have special benefits for the disadvantaged in society. It gives them an opportunity to have good services, to become market participants. So that's a crucial contribution to society as well. I'd say a final contribution is that it gives society confidence that the great political bargain that many emerging countries have made will be fulfilled. And that political bargain is to have a liberal economic order that relies on private enterprise to provide goods and services throughout the economy. But the other side of the bargain is that citizens can have assurance that that system will operate to their benefit. And the establishment of a competition policy regime, a competition authority, is part of fulfilling that bargain. If citizens are convinced that those arrangements are in place, there's a greater likelihood that they will have trust in their government, trust in the markets. That kind of civic trust, I think, is an indispensable ingredient in having not only an effective market system, but having an effective political process too.
Having a competition authority or competition legal framework is one thing, but then another thing is the way it's enforced within a country. So let me ask you this: how big of a headache in general is the enforcement part, and what needs to be done for the policy to be enforced in a better and more systematic way?
There's nothing easy about enforcement. It can be a headache that keeps you up all night and gives you pain during the day. In many countries, in many legal fields, there's a great distance between an aspiration, a policy idea, and its actual realization in practice. Crossing that distance requires what we would call effective implementation. That's a function of having a good agency that is not only expert in theory but in practice. It's a function of having adequate tools to enforce the law. It's a function of the fact of having scrutiny and oversight by courts, by elected officials about policy choices, by having a vibrant community of commentary that tests the assumptions on which the agency is acting and subjects its activities to commentary that is tough, critical, and informative. These are all conditions that are important for effective policy implementation. I would say a last ingredient, especially for a newer authority, is to have the benefit of learning that's taken place in other jurisdictions. Today there are about 140 jurisdictions that have competition law systems. Roughly 110 of those have been created since 1990. So we've had over 3 decades now of experience with the development and implementation of competition regimes across a wide range of countries. They've generated know-how that's very useful for deciding how to enforce the law, how to conduct investigations, what theories of harm tend to be successful, which aren't. It's enormously valuable, I would say indispensable, for a newer competition authority to draw upon that experience to accelerate the process of learning, rather than trying to discover everything for the first time on its own.
One of the risks associated, well, at least theoretically associated with newly developed competition agencies is political scrutiny from the government. When the government uses a given authority for whatever reasons, for political reasons, obviously. What should be done to avoid this risk, especially in emerging countries such as Georgia?
One of the most important elements is to develop awareness of the importance of having certain types of autonomy and to understand the type of autonomy that's crucial. The autonomy that matters most is that the agency is not subject to direction by elected officials or other government appointees who are instructing it exactly how to use its authority. For example, in the case of a merger, to tell the authority, allow the merger to go ahead because my political friends are carrying out the transaction. Or say in the case of a cartel prosecution, leave my friends alone. These are people who supported my ascent to power and government, leave them alone. That kind of intervention directly in the decision to investigate and prosecute is extremely destructive. Because when agencies appear before courts, the argument they're making to the courts is you should defer to my judgment. Why? Because I'm using expertise that you don't have. If it's apparent to the courts that the basis for the decision to prosecute is the political instruction or coercion of elected officials, there's no expertise to defer to, and they won't defer to it. So the very effectiveness of the agency requires that kind of insulation from certain types of political intervention. But to say that autonomy is important in some areas is not to say that isolation from any kind of interaction with the political process is appropriate. One, I think it's completely unattainable. You cannot be completely independent if you are asking Parliament every year for a budget. There's a limit to the independence that you can have there. The other is that you have to have a conversation with them because on a regular basis, you are seeking upgrades. Successful systems receive upgrades in the form of more budget, more authority, greater capacity to use authority in ways that perhaps have not been used in the past. So you're always going to the political officials periodically and asking for upgrades. If you haven't had a conversation with them, if they don't know who you are, they're likely to say no. So to be effective, there has to be an engagement. And as we were saying before, there has to be an engagement for purposes of accountability. It's inappropriate for an elected official to tell the authority, sue my political enemies and reward my political friends. It is entirely appropriate to say, tell me about your philosophy for merger control. Explain to me why you have used your power in these ways, and especially as a safeguard for overreaching by any competition agency, to subject the agency to questioning, examination, about decisions taken in the past. That kind of oversight promotes the accountability that tends to ensure that human beings, tempted perhaps to do things for reasons that are not related to the larger social well-being, channel their ambition and their efforts to serve society and not simply themselves. So there's a tension among the goals of autonomy, accountability, and effectiveness. And I had a colleague once who, in political science, said that the place you want in the solar system of policymaking is like the place of the Earth in the solar system that we know. You want to be close enough to the sun that you are not frozen out, but you do not want to be so close that you're burned to a crisp. You want to be the Earth. You don't want to be Mercury. You don't want to be Saturn. You want to be close enough. That's the sweet spot that an agency wants to occupy.
What a great metaphor. Mr. Kovacic, let's talk about the other side. What should be done for regulators to perceive businesses, companies, as more of allies and not as units that somehow are within the direct jurisdiction, you know what I mean, right? So that the whole system works more smoothly.
I think there has to be understanding of two kinds, and it's an understanding that comes out of a discussion between business enterprises and the regulators. The business enterprises have to understand that the effective functioning of the economy depends on the acceptance of certain norms of good behavior. That in the area of consumer protection, for example, they won't lie to their customers. They won't cheat them by misrepresenting the quality of their goods or the nature of their goods. They won't engage in cartels. Again, to take the case of public procurement, cartels that rig bids on public tenders that would raise the price that the offerors obtain, but cause governments to spend less on needed social services. They have to understand that certain kinds of behavior destroy the effective operation of the markets and invite far more intrusive government intervention in the economy. Business people have to understand that, as well as realizing that their adherence to these norms is vital to generating long-term, durable public support for a market system. The regulators need a certain profound understanding as well, and that is to know the crucial role that business plays as a source of wealth, as a source of products and services, innovation and dynamism for the economy. If you begin by the assumption that most business people are not acting in the social interest, that leads you on a path towards intervention that can be quite misguided. That is, many business people understand the importance of government oversight. It's important for the agency to understand what business does, how it does it, and to know the rationale for the specific actions that they're taking. That's an understanding that the regulator has to develop as well. That understanding on both the regulated industry side and the regulator side, I think is usefully developed through a process of mutual discussion in public settings, such as this one, workshops to which the larger public is invited, events convened by universities within the country that provide a forum for discussion about the rationale for business practices, but also the importance of public intervention to deal with market failures, and to act as an ally in business to push aside public controls that needlessly restrict competition, with an important business constituency being new, smaller enterprises or would-be entrepreneurs. That two-sided understanding is very important for the functioning of the economy.
What would your advice be to Georgia, which is has somewhat little experience in this regard? How to find the golden ratio? How to find the Earth's place in the solar system, so that on one hand, businesses are not limited and the wealth that they generate is there, but on the other side, the rights of the consumers are also protected?
One of the most important means for achieving that kind of balance is to have a component of the agency's agenda that would consist of what we might call research and analysis, policy research and development. That kind of research focuses on examining the existing condition of commerce within the nation, but also examining the effects of past intervention or a lack of past intervention. It's a culture that focuses on trying to assess the consequences of past government policy decisions, including the decisions of the Competition Authority. That provides guidance about where intervention is appropriate. In many ways, it means that the agency seeks to be as smart as it possibly can about deciding how to use its resources. This is a way of adjusting the agency's programs to get the greatest possible value for society from its expenditures. In many ways, simply put, evaluation is a crucial means of deciding whether you're on the right path. Evaluation is not easy. When you do an evaluation, sometimes you discover that you didn't make the right choice, or that you simply had no effect at all. In many cases, public officials, or I guess human beings generally, would prefer not to have that be the result of the evaluation. So there can be a tendency to resist it altogether and say, let's just assume we're doing a good job. So having a culture that promotes continuing assessment of performance is a very good discipline that pushes you in the direction of making policy choices that occupy the sweet spot in the solar system of policymaking.
Have you had the chance to talk to or to work with the Georgia National Competition Agency? Could you maybe rate whatever they've done over the last years?
Of course, the Georgian system has gone through several phases. It began in one relatively weak form in the 1990s. That was discontinued. It was relaunched in a new form in a more modern era. I suppose we could say that the history of the authority as we know it now is a relatively short history. So, and in many ways, still difficult to assess in a meaningful way. My view in looking at the experience of other agencies is you need 20, 25 years to know whether in a basic way, in a confident way, that you're on the right path. You have to gain experience from your own enforcement. You have to see how the system performs in the face of political regime changes. That is there durable political support for the program? If you have a change from a political party of one perspective to another, do they respect the core functions of the agency and continue to support it? A regime change can bring new perspectives. That can be a healthy part of the agency's development. But does the agency fare well in the face of political changes? When there's controversy, does it adjust its policies in a sensible way? If it were the metaphor of boxing, how well do you take a punch? There'll be times when things don't go well, and you have to pick yourself up and get back to work in a meaningful way. So it takes a while to see that. My view is that if we do a preliminary assessment, there are a lot of things taking place that I like a lot. One, I have observed over time the work of the agency in recruiting personnel. At my university, George Washington University in Washington, we have the enormous, great privilege of having students from Georgia and former employees of the Competition Authority in our graduate program. I have seen through them that the flow of talent into the agency is very impressive and very encouraging. I wouldn't say that having great talent by itself is sufficient to succeed. Without it, there's no point in trying. So one very promising thing I see reflected in my own students, but in meeting others, is that the quality of the talent pool goes up and up. That's a great sign. Now, I know that there's some movement back to the private sector, to other government ministries, but that's a good thing. If nobody wants to poach your employees, that's a terrible sign. So that kind of turnover is healthy, but you have to keep replacing them. So one thing I like a lot is the development of a stronger and stronger talent pool. A second thing I like is the habit and custom that's developed of the agency to assess its performance, to ask, how are we doing? Do we have the right mix of skills and responsibilities? Do we have the right resources? As a way of seeking upgrades. If you don't seek upgrades on a regular basis in this field, you're falling behind. And I think that's a healthy culture. Another thing I like a great deal is the formation of constructive relationships with other regulators that have overlapping or related policy duties in areas such as procurement, telecommunications, oversight of the water supply. In a number of areas, you see the authority building relationships that I think are going to be vital for success in the future. That's extremely healthy. Another thing I like, a good sign, is that you see Georgia engage deeply with international organizations that either on a global basis or on a regional basis or on a bilateral basis are a vital sense of know-how and intellectual tech transfer to the operation of the authority. I think the Georgian agency leadership sees that as a way in which its own capability can be lifted dramatically, that you don't operate in isolation and have to learn entirely by yourself, that in a world of 140 competition authorities, there's been a lot of experimentation, and there are many opportunities to learn from what they did, because they're testing what works, what doesn't work. Is any country identical to Georgia in its characteristics? Of course not.
Mr. Kovacic, let me ask you the last question. We're attending the Consumer and Competition Protection International Conference here in Tbilisi. How was your experience like? First part, and then, in your opinion, why is it important to have such a platform in emerging countries?
It's a wonderful conference. It's wonderful in several ways. It's an excellent collection of perspectives from a variety of different institutions inside and outside of Georgia. It's an enormous honor for an outsider like me to have a chance to not only observe that, but participate in the conversation. The conversation is, I think, casting a very helpful light on existing programs and directions for future policy development. This is a very healthy element of the development of a good system. And it also reflects the engagement internally, the collaboration among the Competition Authority and other regulators, but also the cooperation that the authority is engaged in with other nations, which is a vital part of its growth and development, and I think an essential element on the path to ultimate membership in the European Union itself. So that all of those things are extremely positive, and I find the discussion to be taking place at the highest possible level. I see it as a first-rate seminar, which I would enroll in if I had the chance to go, and for myself, having the opportunity to be on the platform is a delight. I first came to Georgia in the mid-1990s. I've had many opportunities to return, many to work with the public authorities responsible for competition law. So there's a deep personal satisfaction for me to continue to have an opportunity to observe that progress. But this is a first-rate program that's not simply a celebration of the mere existence of the agency. We don't celebrate longevity for its own sake, but an opportunity to take stock of what's taking place and, crucially, to identify areas in which things could be better.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovacic, for your time, for your insights. We hope to see you again in the future and then to have the chance once again to talk about competition law.
Thank you for the privilege of meeting with you and discussing this crucial element of policy development in Georgia, and I greatly look forward to next time to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.